In the summer of 1987, a young deputy marshal clocked out of work, got into her car and drove into the night. She was never seen again. At first, people thought maybe she had gone undercover, maybe she was chasing someone, or maybe she just wanted to disappear. But none of it fit. She left behind her family, her badge, her entire life. For nearly 20 years, her case gathered dust. No body, no car, no answers. It was as if she had been swallowed by the earth. Then, almost 2 decades later, a construction crew working at an abandoned quarry glanced down into the black water and spotted the roof of a car. When divers pulled it out, everyone thought this would finally close the mystery. But what they found inside raised even more chilling questions. Was this a tragic accident, or was someone trying to bury the truth forever? We're about to dive into one of the most haunting cold cases in American history. Make sure you hit like and subscribe if you love true crime mysteries like this. And before we start, drop a comment and tell me, where in the world are you watching from right now? In 1987, the small town of Madison had someone who stood out. Her name was Deputy Marshal Claire Whitman. She was only 27 years old, but people already looked at her with deep respect. Claire wasn't from a big city. She grew up in this very town, walking the same streets, shopping at the same stores. But when she put on her uniform, people said she looked different, strong, serious, ready to protect anyone who needed her. Claire wasn't the type to brag. She never talked about being tough, but people saw it every day. She handled criminals with calm authority. She helped kids cross the street. She sat with elderly neighbors who felt unsafe. Everyone knew Claire could be trusted. Her coworkers often said she worked harder than anyone else. She would stay late, take extra shifts, and never complain. Her parents described her as someone who had always carried responsibility on her shoulders, even as a child. Her younger sister, Sarah, said Claire was the kind of person who never quit, no matter how hard things got. But behind that toughness, Claire also had warmth. She smiled often, especially with friends. She loved joking with coworkers during coffee breaks, and she always remembered birthdays. People didn't just see her as a deputy. They saw her as a daughter, a sister, and a friend. That balance made her special. She was strict when she had to be, but kind when it mattered most. In a town where crime was rare but fear was real, Claire gave people comfort. They believed as long as she was around, nothing truly bad could happen. No one could have imagined that she herself would become the victim of a mystery so dark. It would haunt the town for decades. On June 6, 1987, Claire finished a long shift at the marshal's office. It was late at night, close to 11 p.m. The day had been busy, and most of her coworkers had already gone home. Claire was one of the last left in the building. One officer remembered walking past her desk. She was writing a few last notes, then gathering her things. She looked tired but not upset. Nothing seemed strange. She told him, "I'll see you tomorrow." As she left, she smiled at the few coworkers still there. That smile stuck in their memories. Later, many of them would replay it over and over, realizing it was the last time they ever saw her. She grabbed her car keys, tucked her badge into her bag, and headed out the door. The parking lot was nearly empty. Claire's car sat under a flickering streetlight. A few officers waved goodbye. She waved back. It was just an ordinary night. No one noticed anything unusual. There were no strangers hanging around, no arguments, no sign of fear. It was so normal that when she walked out, no one thought twice about it. But that was the moment when everything began. She got into her car, started the engine, and drove off into the darkness. The next morning, when she didn't show up for work, those same coworkers would sit in silence, stunned. They remembered her walking out the door, cheerful, calm, and alive, and they would ask themselves for years, how could someone vanish between a parking lot and home, leaving nothing behind? That final smile became the last image they had of her. Claire's drive home should have taken less than 15 minutes. She lived just outside town in a small house near her parents. The route was simple, one main road, a few turns, then her driveway. But Claire never made it. The next morning, her parents noticed something was wrong. Normally, Claire stopped by for coffee before work. That morning, she didn't show up. Her mother tried calling. No answer. At first, they thought she had overslept, But soon it became clear something wasn't right. By 9 a.m., the marshal's office called her family. Claire hadn't come in, she hadn't called. She hadn't been seen since leaving the office the night before. Her house was checked. The lights were off. The bed was untouched. Her car was gone. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. Panic spread quickly. Her sister, Sarah, rushed over demanding answers. Neighbors joined the search. They expected to find her car broken down, maybe a flat tire on the side of the road. But mile after mile, there was nothing. Officers began sweeping the main highway. They checked every ditch, every turnoff, every stretch of road she might have taken. No skid marks, no broken glass, no sign of an accident. It was impossible to understand. A deputy marshal, trained and alert, simply vanished on her way home. No witnesses, no calls for help, no trace. By noon, the case was officially declared an emergency. Search teams were called in. Helicopters began to scan the fields. Radios crackled with orders. The whole town seemed to freeze in shock. But Claire Whitman, who had promised to keep her town safe, was gone, and no one could explain where she had gone or why. By the afternoon of June 7, word had spread. Deputy Marshal Claire Whitman was missing. The news hit the town like a shockwave. People gathered in small groups outside shops and on street corners whispering, "How could someone like Claire just vanish?" She wasn't a stranger passing through. Everyone knew her. Everyone trusted her. And now she was gone without a trace. Parents grew nervous. If a deputy could disappear, what did that mean for their own safety? Kids were told not to walk alone. Doors were locked earlier than usual. People checked their windows twice before going to bed. Rumors started to swirl almost immediately. Some said Claire had been targeted by a criminal she arrested. Others wondered if she'd been ambushed by someone lying in wait. A few even whispered about darker possibilities, that she had chosen to leave, that maybe she was living a secret life no one knew about. But those who knew Claire best rejected that idea instantly. She was responsible. She loved her job. She loved her family. She would never run away. Something had happened to her, something bad. The marshal's office held a press conference that evening. Reporters crammed into the small room, cameras flashing. The sheriff stood at the podium and announced that every available resource would be used to find her. "We will not rest until she is brought home," he said. But behind the serious faces, many officers felt fear. They had no leads, no car, no evidence. Claire had simply vanished between the office parking lot and her house. And the longer she was missing, the darker the town's imagination grew. The very next morning, the first major search began. Police and volunteers gathered before sunrise. They split into groups, covering every road Claire might have taken. Helicopters hovered over the countryside, scanning fields and forests. Officers walked ditches with flashlights, looking for tire tracks or broken glass. Boats dragged the nearby rivers, their engines rumbling as divers searched beneath the surface. Neighbors opened barns and sheds, hoping she might be trapped or hiding. Farmers searched their land, combing through tall grass and empty lots. Every lead, no matter how small, was checked. But as hours stretched into days, the frustration grew. Nothing was found. No car, no clothing, no purse. Not even a sign of a struggle. Reporters began swarming the area, their vans lined up outside the marshal's office. Every night, the same headline appeared on the news: "Deputies still missing." Families huddled around TVs, waiting for some kind of breakthrough. The town joined in, desperate to help. Hundreds of volunteers walked fields and back roads, forming long lines to cover more ground. Some prayed as they searched, whispering Claire's name. Others carried photos of her, showing them to strangers, begging for tips. But after 5 full days, the search teams had nothing. It was like she had been swallowed by the earth. The first search ended in silence and dread. As the days turned into weeks with no answers, the silence became unbearable. People needed an explanation. With nothing official to hold on to, the town began filling in the blanks themselves. Some were sure Claire had been targeted. They said someone she arrested had been waiting for revenge. Maybe she was ambushed on her way home, forced off the road, and taken somewhere no one would ever find her. That theory spread quickly because it made sense. Claire was a deputy. She dealt with dangerous people. Enemies were easy to imagine. But others told a different story. They whispered that maybe she hadn't been who they thought she was. Maybe she left on purpose, started a new life far from Madison. To many, that felt insulting. Her family hated hearing it. Her sister Sarah said over and over she would never leave us. Never. Still, the rumor kept coming back. Then there were the darkest whispers of all. Some said something bigger was happening, something no one dared talk about openly. A cover-up, a hidden crime, a secret buried by people in power. The lack of evidence made imaginations run wild. The truth was no one knew anything, and that made the fear worse. If someone like Claire could vanish without a trace, then no one was safe. Parents walked their children to school. Women avoided driving alone at night. People locked their doors earlier, checking them twice. Every year that passed without answers, the whispers grew louder. They would hang over the town like a cloud, following every conversation, every memory of Claire. The disappearance of Deputy Marshal Claire Whitman was not treated like any normal missing person case. Within 24 hours, it became a top priority. Detectives from across the county were called in. They crowded into a small conference room at the marshal's office. On the wall, they pinned a giant map of the town and its outskirts. Red markers showed the route Claire should have driven that night. Yellow markers showed every place already searched. Every step of her last night was written out on a timeline. When she left work, what time she waved goodbye, which direction her car was seen heading. The detectives hoped that by breaking the night down minute by minute, something would stand out. They pulled out files of every criminal Claire had ever dealt with: assaults, burglaries, domestic disputes. If she had enemies, they wanted to know. Some detectives focused on her personal life. Who were her friends? Did she have a boyfriend? Did anyone close to her have a reason to hurt her? The case file grew thicker by the hour. Every scrap of information was added, even rumors from neighbors. One detective said later that it felt like searching for a ghost. Claire had simply vanished, leaving nothing behind. Still, the team refused to give up. The longer she was missing, the more certain they became. This wasn't just a woman late coming home. This was something far darker. The first big step was talking to the people who knew Claire best. Detectives sat down with her parents, her sister Sarah, and close friends. Her parents were clear. Claire was steady. She didn't make reckless choices. She didn't run away from problems. If she didn't come home, it was because something stopped her. Her mother said she would never do this to us. Never. Sarah, her younger sister, was even more direct. She told police, "If you're looking for signs she wanted to leave, you won't find any. She loved this job. She loved her family. Something happened to her. That's the only answer." Coworkers said the same. Claire was dependable, reliable, and completely dedicated to her work. One officer described her as the kind of person you'd call at 3 a.m., and she'd show up without hesitation. Detectives also spoke with neighbors and old friends. None of them believed Claire had secrets. She was honest, sometimes too honest. She wasn't hiding anything. The message was the same in every interview. Claire did not choose this. Something or someone took her away. For detectives, these interviews narrowed the focus. If Claire didn't leave by choice, then foul play was the most likely explanation. But who would want her gone? And how could they make her disappear so completely? After finishing interviews, detectives turned to records. If Claire had made plans to leave, there would be signs. They pulled her bank history first. No large withdrawals, no sudden transfers. Her account looked normal: small purchases at grocery stores, gas stations, and a few restaurant stops. Nothing stood out. Next, they checked her credit cards. Same story. No unusual spending. No tickets, no hotel stays, no travel booked. Detectives then got her phone records. They traced every call she made in the weeks before she vanished. Most were to family, coworkers, and routine numbers. There were no late-night calls to strangers. No strange patterns. Nothing. Finally, they examined her diary. It was a plain notebook she kept at home. Inside were notes about her shifts, reminders about errands, even doodles in the margins. Detectives read every page, hopping for a clue. But there was nothing, no sign she planned to leave. no sign she was scared, no secret relationship. It was like her life had been frozen in time. Everything looked perfectly normal. This was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it meant Claire wasn't hiding something. Terrifying because it meant there were no answers. The trail was completely cold. For detectives, it felt like chasing shadows. Every time they thought they might find a lead, it disappeared. Claire had been a normal young woman living a normal life, and yet she was gone without a trace. With interviews and records turning up nothing, detectives returned to the field. If Claire had vanished on the road, then somewhere along her path, there had to be a trace. Search teams spread across miles of countryside. Helicopters flew low over cornfields and wooded areas, scanning for the shape of a car hidden beneath trees. On the ground, deputies pushed through tall weeds, their boots sinking into muddy ditches. Rivers became a main focus. Boats dragged heavy chains across the bottom, pulling up branches, trash, and broken logs. Divers dropped into the dark water, feeling blindly through mud and stone. Each time they surfaced empty-handed, frustration deepened. Farmers across the county unlocked barns and sheds, letting deputies check inside. Police dogs sniffed through haystacks, pawed at doors, and circled fence lines. Nothing. The searches grew larger, covering old quarries, abandoned houses, even wells. Officers worked 12-hour shifts in the blazing sun and pouring rain. Volunteers came and went, forming long human chains to sweep entire fields. Days turned into weeks. The only thing they found was silence. No tire tracks, no broken fences, no sign of a struggle. It was as if her car had lifted off the ground and disappeared into thin air. The emptier the searches became, the heavier the fear grew. If nothing could be found in all this land, then maybe the truth wasn't out there at all. As weeks stretched on, the case began to drown in tips. Hundreds of calls poured into the Marshal's office. Some claimed they saw Claire's car on back roads. Others swore they spotted her walking into a diner 2 towns over. A few even claimed to have seen a strange man near the highway that night. Detectives chased every single lead. They drove hours to check empty lots where a car had been buried. They interviewed witnesses who swore they saw a woman matching Claire's description. They even followed up on psychics who promised to know where she was. Every tip collapsed. The car sightings were mistakes. The supposed diner encounter turned out to be another woman with similar hair. The strange man was just a local farmer heading home late. Meanwhile, rumors swirled around town. People said Claire had been seen in another state. Others whispered she was being held somewhere against her will. Each story spread hope, and then disappointment when police confirmed it wasn't true. The problem wasn't a lack of leads, it was too many, and every dead end wasted precious time. Detectives grew tired. The case file grew thicker, but the mystery stayed the same. No matter how many tips came in, the truth never appeared. Claire Whitman was still gone, and the trail was colder than ever. By the second month, detectives began saying out loud what everyone had been avoiding. If Claire was alive, there would be a trace by now. A phone call, a credit card swipe, a car spotted somewhere. But there was nothing. Inside the Marshal's office, the mood shifted. Detectives still worked long hours, but the energy was different. Files piled up, and the giant map on the wall stayed the same. No new pins, no new clues, just silence. Whispers started. Some officers admitted to each other what no one wanted to say publicly. Claire was probably dead. Maybe her car was buried deep in the woods. Maybe she'd been driven into a lake. Maybe she was locked away in a place no one would ever find. For her family, this was unbearable. Every time they met with detectives, they asked the same question: "Do you think she's still alive?" At first, police tried to keep hope alive, but now their answers were quieter, less certain. Behind closed doors, the case was starting to look like something darker than a disappearance. It looked like a murder with no body, no weapon, and no crime scene. For the first time, detectives faced a chilling truth. The person who made Claire vanish might have gotten away with it. With the trail cold, detectives turned to rumors. In a small town, people always talk, and soon, whispers began pointing to actual names. The first group of whispers focused on a dangerous man Claire once arrested. He had been violent, unstable, and very angry when she helped put him behind bars. Some believed he never forgot it. They said he promised revenge. The second rumor circled inside her own workplace. A fellow officer. People whispered that he admired Claire maybe too much. When she didn't return his interest, anger may have grown. Was it jealousy? Was it obsession? Detectives couldn't ignore it. The third rumor was stranger. On the night Claire disappeared, someone claimed they saw a shadowy figure near her route home, a man standing by a car parked along the road. No one knew who he was. No one could identify him. But the sighting gave detectives a third possible suspect, a stranger who crossed her path at the worst moment. Now the case had three possible answers: a criminal with a grudge, a jealous coworker, or a nameless stranger. Each had potential motive. Each could explain her disappearance. Detectives knew they had to chase all three. Detectives began with the first name, the violent offender Claire had helped arrest. He had been a nightmare years earlier, reckless, abusive, known for sudden bursts of rage. Claire's testimony played a key role in putting him away. At sentencing, he reportedly glared at her and muttered something about payback. It stuck with the officers in that courtroom. Now, with Claire gone, old fears resurfaced. Had he finally made good on his threat? Detectives pulled his file. Assaults, domestic violence, threats. He was the kind of man who held grudges. They tracked his release records, parole history, and known addresses. If anyone wanted Claire gone, it was him. Some in town were convinced. They told police, "Look no further, he did this." Detectives leaned in hard. They spoke with old victims, former neighbors, and even prison guards who remembered him. Every detail added weight to the theory. It felt like the case was finally cracking open. A suspect with motive, a history of violence, a personal connection. But before detectives could close in, they needed one thing: proof he was anywhere near Claire the night she vanished. Detectives dug deeper into the offender's life during the week Claire disappeared. They pulled work logs, phone records, even bus tickets. What they found flipped the case upside down. On the night Claire vanished, the man wasn't in town. He wasn't even in the state. Records showed he had been living temporarily with a relative several hundred miles away. Pay stubs from a local job matched the timeline. Even more damaging to the theory, multiple witnesses confirmed it. He was seen at work. He was seen at a bar. He simply could not have been near Claire that night. Detectives tried to poke holes. Was there a chance he left, drove back, and returned without anyone noticing? The timeline made it impossible. Travel alone would have taken too long. Just like that, the strongest lead collapsed. Detectives were frustrated. All the time and energy spent chasing this suspect had led to nothing. He had motive, yes. He had anger, yes. But in the end, he had an airtight alibi. The file was closed on him. The case, once again, was left wide open. When the violent offender was cleared, attention shifted closer to home. Inside the marshal's office, whispers grew louder about one of their own. A fellow officer had always shown an unusual interest in Claire. He complimented her often, volunteered to work shifts with her, and seemed to hover whenever she was around. Some coworkers thought it was harmless. Others thought it was something darker. The story went that he wanted more than friendship. When Claire didn't return those feelings, his attitude changed. He became colder, distant, sometimes even sharp when her name came up. To some, it looked like jealousy. To others, it looked like anger. Detectives decided they couldn't ignore it. A jealous coworker with access to Claire's schedule, knowing her routines, and carrying a badge. It all made for a dangerous possibility. Quietly, police began to put him under the spotlight. They reviewed his assignments the night Claire vanished. They checked his patrol logs, his reports, and every small detail. They didn't tell him at first, but behind closed doors, he was suddenly a top suspect. If the whispers were true, rejection might have turned to rage. And rage could explain everything. Detectives finally called the coworker in. He walked into the interview room calm, almost too calm. They started with questions. Where were you that night? Who saw you? Did you have any contact with Claire after she left the office? His answers were steady. But detectives wanted more. They brought in a polygraph examiner. The coworker agreed without hesitation. For hours, wires tracked his breathing, heart rate, and every response. When the test was over, results came back. He passed. No spikes. No signs of lying. Detectives didn't stop there. They double-checked his timeline. His patrol car logs showed he was miles away, handling a routine call. Radio transmissions backed it up. Witnesses confirmed they saw him on duty. Piece by piece, his story held together. Still, doubts lingered. Passing a polygraph didn't mean innocence. But without proof, detectives had no choice. The coworker walked out free, his name still whispered in the background but officially cleared on paper. Another lead gone, another door shut, and the mystery of Claire's disappearance grew even deeper. Just when detectives felt trapped, a new voice came forward. A local resident claimed they saw something odd the night Claire vanished. Driving home late, they remembered spotting a car pulled to the side of the road not far from Claire's usual route. Next to it stood a shadowy figure. The memory was hazy, but it stuck out because the person seemed to be waiting, just standing there in the dark. Detectives jumped on it. Was this the break they needed? If the witness was right, this mystery stranger might have been the last person to see Claire alive. For months, they chased the lead. They interviewed drivers, checked gas stations, and compared descriptions to known locals. They even ran sketches based on the witness account, but every search came up short. No one matched. No one fit. The stranger remained a ghost, a person without a name, without a trace. The idea was terrifying. If this figure had something to do with Claire's disappearance, it meant a dangerous person was still out there, walking free. But without an identity, detectives had nothing solid. Just one more question added to the pile. By the end of the year, detectives were drained. Every lead they chased had collapsed. The violent offender cleared, the jealous coworker cleared, the mystery stranger unidentified. There was no crime scene, no body, no murder weapon. The only thing they had was a woman who drove away one night and never came home. Behind closed doors, detectives admitted it out loud. It felt like Claire had been swallowed by the earth. One moment she was there, alive, smiling, talking to coworkers. The next, she was gone without a trace. Some officers began to doubt the case would ever be solved. Reports were filed, tips stored in boxes, evidence locked away. The energy drained from the investigation. But for Claire's family, giving up wasn't an option. They refused to let her name disappear into a folder marked unsolved. Still, for the detectives who had spent endless hours chasing ghosts, the case was a wall they couldn't break. Every door they opened led to another dead end. And the mystery of what really happened to Claire only grew darker. While detectives hit dead ends, Claire's parents refused to sit quietly. Every week, sometimes twice a week, they called the Marshal's office. They demanded updates, no matter how small. If detectives said there was nothing new, her parents pushed harder. Check again, they said. Try something different. At home, their kitchen table no longer looked like a place to eat. It was buried under papers, newspaper clippings, old photos, handwritten notes, maps with circles drawn in red pen. It looked more like a detective's office than a family's home. Her father kept track of every conversation with police, writing down names, times, and promises made. Her mother clipped every article, marking the lines that mentioned their daughter's name. To them, every scrap of information mattered. Neighbors sometimes suggested they try to move on, but her parents refused. "She's out there," her mother said. "We're not letting her be forgotten." The calls, the clippings, the pressure, it was their way of keeping the case alive. If police slowed down, the parents sped up. In their eyes, silence meant giving up, and giving up was never an option. Claire's younger sister decided to fight in her own way. She went public. She sat down with reporters from local TV stations and newspapers. Cameras recorded as she spoke directly to the community and to whoever might know something. Her voice was shaky, but her words were clear. "Please bring her home." She described how much Claire meant to the family, how she was the strong one, the dependable one, how their parents cried every night waiting for a phone call that never came. Reporters aired her interviews across the state. Some nights, her face filled the evening news. Other times, her words appeared in headlines. Sister begs for help in Deputy Marshal's disappearance. The sister also printed flyers. She and friends stapled them to telephone poles, handed them out at stores, and left them at gas stations. Her message never changed. Someone, somewhere, knew something. Her plea wasn't just for tips. It was a demand. A demand that people not look away. A demand that the story stay alive until Claire came home. Every year when the date of Claire's disappearance came around, her family gathered. At first, the vigils were big. Neighbors, church groups, even off-duty officers joined in. People held candles, prayed, and sang softly under the streetlights. The crowd stretched across the park. Her parents spoke each year, thanking everyone and reminding them why they were there. "We won't stop until she comes home," her father said. Her mother often stood silent, clutching a candle so tight her hands shook. But as the years went on, the crowds began to shrink. At the 5th anniversary, there were still dozens of people. By the 10th, only a handful came. By the 15th, sometimes it was just close family and a few friends. Still, the family never stopped. Even if it meant standing in the cold with only a few candles flickering, they showed up. They lit the same prayers into the night sky, hoping somehow Claire could see them. For the family, these vigils weren't just traditions. They were promises. A promise that she wouldn't be forgotten, no matter how much time passed. While the family kept the search alive, the rest of the town slowly moved forward. Shops reopened. Schools filled with new students. People went back to normal routines. At first, Claire's disappearance was the only thing anyone talked about. Her face was in every paper, every news update, every conversation in the diner. But after years without answers, people grew tired of the mystery. They wanted to stop feeling afraid. New crimes took over the headlines. New tragedies stole the attention. The missing deputy became old news. For her parents and sister, this shift was crushing. When they called for help, fewer reporters came. When they held vigils, fewer neighbors showed. It felt like the town had let go while they were still holding on. Her mother once told a journalist, "It feels like we're the only ones left fighting for her." The silence around the case hurt almost as much as the loss itself. The family knew they were alone, but alone or not, they refused to stop. As the years rolled on, the case began to fade inside the marshal's office. Detectives who once worked long nights chasing leads were reassigned to new crimes. Fresh cases demanded their attention, while Claire's case sat waiting. The evidence, boxes of reports, photos, and handwritten notes, was moved into storage. What had once been spread across desks and walls was now sealed in cardboard and stacked on shelves. The giant investigation board, once covered in pins and string, was taken down. For the family, this felt like betrayal. They called the office only to hear new voices who barely knew the case. Some detectives spoke kindly, others gave short answers, but the message was always the same. There was nothing more to do. The case that once shook the town and made headlines now sat quietly in a room no one visited. It had become a cold case, one of many. But while the files gathered dust in storage, the pain in her family's home never slowed down. For them, the mystery wasn't past tense. It was alive every single day. Despite everything, the silence, the shrinking vigil, the cold case files, Claire's family never wavered. Her parents repeated the same line in every interview. She didn't run away. They said it so many times it became like a shield. No rumor, no theory, no official report could change what they believed. Their daughter had been taken from them. Something terrible happened, and they would not stop until they knew what. Her sister, now older, carried the fight forward. She promised she would not let the world forget. In interviews, she spoke with fire in her voice. "We will bring her home, alive or not. We need answers." For the family, the years didn't erase their determination. Each missed birthday, each empty holiday seat, only made the hole bigger and the search more urgent. Even as the town moved on, even as detectives gave up, the family's belief stood like stone. They knew the truth was out there, somewhere. It was the summer of 2006, 19 years after Claire vanished. The quarry where she would finally be found had been abandoned for decades. Most people in town barely remembered it was there. It was quiet, overgrown, and left to rot. That morning, a construction crew rolled in. The site had been bought by a developer who planned to clear it and build on the land. To the workers, it was just another job. They parked trucks, unloaded equipment, and began checking the ground. The quarry itself was a massive pit, filled with dark water that stretched down like a hole in the earth. Locals called it dangerous and avoided it, but to the crew, it was just part of the landscape they had to work around. The men joked, smoked, and worked as the day began. Nobody expected anything unusual. To them, it was just another ordinary workday. But beneath the water in that silent quarry, something was waiting, something that had been hidden for nearly 2 decades. That day, the secret would finally surface, and the mystery of the missing deputy would explode back to life. Late in the morning, as the crew moved equipment closer to the edge, one worker leaned over the water. The surface was murky, covered with algae and ripples from the wind, but something caught his eye. At first he thought it was just junk, maybe an old barrel or scrap metal left behind. But as he looked harder, the outline became clearer. It wasn't random. It was smooth, straight, almost like a roof. He waved the others over. Soon half the crew was standing at the edge, squinting into the quarry. Through the shifting green water, the shape grew more obvious. Rusted metal, a frame, the top of a car. The workers went silent. Cars didn't just end up at the bottom of a quarry by accident, and this one looked like it had been down there for years. Someone grabbed a phone and called the sheriff's office. Within the hour, police cruisers rolled in. Deputies stood at the edge, staring into the water, their faces hard. Everyone was thinking the same thing. Could this be the missing deputy? When the call came in, detectives dropped everything. A car spotted in the old quarry. After 19 years, it could be nothing. But deep down, every officer knew what it might mean. By the time police arrived, workers stood in small groups near the edge, whispering. Deputies and detectives pushed forward, peering into the water. From above, the shape was faint, just a shadow beneath the green surface. But to those who had worked the case years ago, the weight of it hit fast. The missing deputy marshal. Her name had haunted this town for almost 2 decades. Could this be the break they never thought they'd see? Detectives radioed for divers, for equipment, for anyone who could pull the wreck from the deep. The site quickly turned into a crime scene. Yellow tape went up. Officers formed a perimeter. The younger cops asked questions, but the older ones stayed quiet. They remembered the days and nights of searching, the interviews, the vigils, the dead ends. Now, standing at this quarry, all those memories rushed back. Everyone wanted to know one thing. Was she down there, waiting all this time? The dive team arrived within hours. They suited up, heavy gear strapped across their backs, masks covering their faces. The water in the quarry was cold, still, and almost black. Nobody could see more than a few inches below the surface. One by one, the divers slipped in. The water swallowed them whole. From above, officers and workers watched the ripples spread, then fade. It was quiet, too quiet, except for the faint sound of radios. Down below, visibility was nearly zero. The divers used flashlights, but the beams only cut a few feet before being swallowed in the dark. They moved slowly, hands reaching out, searching by touch. Then metal, cold, rusted, rough to the touch. One diver traced a line with his gloved hand, the curve of a roof, a door frame, a car. The radio crackled above. "We found it." On the surface, detectives exchanged glances. This was no rumor, no false lead. A car was really down there. And if it was hers, the mystery of what happened to the missing deputy was about to take a shocking turn. Chains were lowered into the quarry, hooked carefully to the rusted frame below. The machinery roared to life, straining as the weight of decades slowly began to rise. Everyone on shore fell silent. The car broke free from the mud with a deep groan. Inch by inch, it came upward, bubbles rushing to the surface. The water churned dark as if fighting to keep its secret. Detectives, deputies, and townspeople who had gathered stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes locked on the rippling water. The sound of grinding metal echoed as the car lifted higher, dripping sludge and weeds. Then the roof appeared, rusted, bent, but clearly a car. Gasps spread through the crowd. The machine strained harder, pulling the vehicle the rest of the way up. Finally, with one last groan, the car broke the surface fully. Mud, weeds, and years of decay clung to it, dripping back into the water below. For nearly 2 decades, this car had been hidden in silence. Now, it was back in daylight, and whatever waited inside was about to answer the town's darkest question. Detectives crowded close as the divers opened the car. The smell of old water and rust hit hard. The interior was ruined, eaten away by years under the quarry's surface. But then they saw it. In the driver's seat sat a skeleton. The bones were strapped in by a seatbelt, head tilted forward, as if frozen in the last moment of life. For a long time, nobody spoke. On the chest, pinned to the ruined fabric of a uniform, something caught the light, a small glint of metal, a badge. The deputy marshal's badge. Gasps spread through the crowd. For 19 years, people had wondered, argued, and whispered about what had happened. Now the truth was staring back at them. She had been here the whole time. Some officers turned away, struggling with the sight. Others stared in silence, remembering the countless hours they had searched for her. The family, finally called to the scene, broke down in tears. The case of the missing deputy was no longer a mystery of where she had been found, but the questions of how and why were just beginning. When the car came up and the badge was found, the town felt a sudden wave of relief. After 19 long years, the missing deputy had been located. Finally, there was closure. The mystery that had haunted families, detectives, and neighbors seemed solved. People hugged. Some cried. For the first time in almost 2 decades, there was an answer. But that relief didn't last long. As detectives stood near the car, they noticed something strange. It didn't look like a normal accident. The vehicle was too intact. The position of the body didn't make sense. One officer whispered, "It looks staged." The longer investigators studied the car, the more questions rose. Why was the seatbelt still buckled? Why hadn't the windows been rolled down in a desperate attempt to escape? Why was the ignition still on? Detectives felt a growing unease. For 19 years, everyone believed the deputy had been murdered or kidnapped. Now, staring at the car, that theory seemed to vanish. But so did the accident theory. It was almost as if the quarry had been holding a secret, not just about where she was, but about what really happened that night. The forensics team moved in, working slowly and carefully. The first detail they noticed was the windows. Every single one was rolled up. If someone had driven into deep water, instinct would be to lower a window to try and escape. But here, all were sealed tight. Next, they checked the ignition. The key was still in place, turned to on. That meant the engine had likely been running when the car went under. But why hadn't she unbuckled her seatbelt? Why hadn't she even tried to open the door? The skeleton sat perfectly in place, buckled in, as if calmly parked instead of trapped underwater. There were no signs of a struggle inside. No broken glass. No claw marks on the interior. Nothing. Forensics experts whispered among themselves. It didn't add up. Most car accidents leave chaos behind. But this looked almost too neat. Detectives wrote notes, shaking their heads. Something about the scene felt wrong. The discovery was supposed to close the case. Instead, it opened the door to even darker questions. Was this truly an accident, or had something been hidden beneath 19 years of silence? When the remains were taken to the medical examiner, everyone hoped the bones would finally tell the full story. After 19 years, the truth had to be there. But once again, answers slipped away. The skeleton showed no bullet wounds, no knife marks, no signs of broken bones from a violent attack. Even the skull was intact. There was nothing to suggest a fight, a struggle, or a murder. The examiner studied every inch and came back with a simple, almost frustrating conclusion. The cause of death was drowning. She had been alive when the car went into the quarry and had not escaped. On paper, it seemed straightforward, but detectives weren't convinced. One investigator said quietly, "It doesn't look like a drowning victim." The buckled seatbelt, the windows, the ignition, all of it pointed to something unusual. Why would a trained deputy marshal just sit and let herself sink without even trying? The official report listed the case as a tragic accident, but off the record, whispers grew. Something about this story still didn't make sense. The truth, it seemed, was still hiding somewhere out of reach. With the car pulled out and the autopsy finished, Theories began to divide the town and the detectives. Some said it was simple. She had missed a turn. The quarry was unlit, abandoned, and easy to mistake on a dark night. Maybe she had been tired after work and drove straight in. Others believed she had been chased. Maybe by someone angry at her, maybe by a stranger on the road. If so, the quarry could have been a trap, a desperate end to a deadly chase. And then there was the darker idea that she had driven in on purpose. But her family and friends refused to believe that. She had no history of depression, no notes, no reason to end her life. Detectives reviewed the evidence again and again, but the details refused to fit into one clear answer. Was this a tragic mistake, or was something else hidden beneath the water? One fact stuck out more than anything else. The quarry was not on her way home. It wasn't even close. Her normal drive should have taken her along well-traveled roads, straight back to her house. The quarry sat in the opposite direction, at the edge of town, hidden behind dirt tracks and broken fences. Detectives asked themselves over and over, why was she there? Some suggested she had been following someone, maybe chasing a car or responding to something she saw. But if that were true, no radio calls were made that night. Her patrol car logs showed nothing unusual. Others wondered if she had agreed to meet someone, a secret meeting in the middle of the night, away from the public eye. But no evidence pointed to that either. Her family insisted she would never just wander to such a dangerous place. The quarry was known for accidents, its steep cliffs and black water making it a death trap. The location itself felt like the biggest clue, but with no proof, detectives couldn't explain it. She had vanished on a normal drive home, yet somehow ended up in the one place she had no reason to be. As detectives dug into the details of the recovered car, new questions started to rise. First, her purse was missing. It wasn't in the car and it wasn't found in the quarry. Deputies checked everywhere, but it had vanished. Second, her police radio was gone. For an officer, that was unusual. Radios were their lifeline. Even if the car sank, the radio should have been inside or nearby. But it was. Third, some early reports hinted at other items missing from the vehicle, small personal belongings that should have been there. But when asked, no one could provide a clear list. The talk around town grew darker. People whispered about evidence being lost or even hidden. Was it incompetence, or was someone covering something up? Detectives hated the idea, but they couldn't ignore it. A missing purse could mean robbery. A missing radio could mean silencing her. Or it could all be sloppy record-keeping after 19 years underwater. Still, the missing pieces left holes in the story, and those holes made the mystery even harder to solve. When the car was pulled from the quarry, many thought the nightmare was finally over. 19 years of searching, wondering, and praying had ended with an answer. But almost immediately, the relief turned into frustration. Yes, she had been found, but the discovery didn't explain what had happened. The official ruling was accidental drowning. The report said she must have lost control of her car, driven into the water, and been trapped. Case closed. But to the people who knew her best, that explanation didn't sit right. Her parents and sisters stared at the quarry and shook their heads. She knew that area well. She would never drive there, and she would never miss a turn badly enough to end up inside it. Detectives whispered the same thing. The seatbelt, the keys, the missing belongings, none of it lined up. They couldn't prove foul play, but they also couldn't explain the holes. For the town, the story became a ghost that wouldn't leave. In diners, people still asked, why was she there? Some believed she was chased. Others thought she was lured. A few even suspected fellow officers knew more than they admitted. Her grave gave her family a place to mourn, but not a place to rest. Each anniversary, they still demanded the same thing, the truth. The quarry had given them answers, but answers that created new mysteries. To this day, no one can say for certain what happened that night in 1987. All they know is that a young deputy marshal vanished, and 19 years later, the Earth gave back only part of her story. For investigators, the file was closed. For her family, it was not. The day of her funeral felt like the whole town had stopped breathing. For 19 years, people had only been able to wonder. Now, at last, there was a casket and a grave to lower it into. Her remains were placed inside a polished coffin, draped with the American flag. Hundreds of law enforcement officers arrived from across the state. Deputy marshals, sheriffs, troopers, and detectives all came to pay respect to one of their own. They lined the streets in full uniform, badges glinting in the sun. Their cars stretched for miles, lights flashing in silence. No sirens, just the hum of engines and the sound of boots on pavement. Her parents walked behind the casket, supported on both sides. Her sister clutched a folded photo of her, refusing to let it go. The family had spent nearly 2 decades begging for answers. Now, they at least had a place to visit, even if the truth still felt far away. At the cemetery, officers stood at attention as the casket was lowered into the ground. A bugler played taps. The flag was folded into sharp corners and handed to her mother, who broke down as it touched her hands. The town wept. For them, it wasn't just the burial of a deputy marshal. It was the burial of hope, of unanswered questions, and of a young life stolen far too early. For her family, the discovery brought an end to the worst part of their nightmare, the not knowing. For 19 years, they woke up each morning wondering where she was. Now, at least, that question had an answer. She was gone and she was home. But peace never followed. Her parents sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folded flag resting in its wooden case. It was supposed to bring comfort. Instead, it felt like a reminder that something still wasn't right. Her sister admitted that while the grave gave her a place to visit, she couldn't stop replaying the same questions. Why the quarry? Why the middle of the night? Why no sign of a crash or struggle? Detectives told the family the official cause of death was drowning, likely an accident. But the family never believed it. They were sure she hadn't just driven into the quarry on her own. To them, it felt like someone had forced her there, and that the truth was being hidden. At church, neighbors offered kind words. "At least you finally have closure," they said. The family would nod politely, but inside they disagreed. Closure wasn't peace. It was simply the end of hope. Behind closed doors, not every officer believed the official story. At roll calls and in quiet hallways, whispers began to spread. Some deputies admitted the case didn't sit right with them. The car in the quarry looked too perfect, too staged. One officer recalled how early reports mentioned her purse and service radio being missing. Later, those details were quietly dropped from the file. When he asked about it, supervisors told him not to worry. Lost in the water, they said, but he wasn't convinced. Others claimed pieces of evidence had vanished over the years, items logged but never seen again. One detective swore there had been a tip about a suspicious vehicle tailing her that night, but the report, he said, was nowhere in the final files. These whispers never made it to the public. On the record, the sheriff's office closed the case as an accident, but off the record, some officers wondered if the truth had been buried along with her car. A few even suggested a cover-up. Maybe someone inside the system knew more than they ever admitted. Maybe powerful hands had steered the case away from dangerous questions. The rumors only deepened the mystery. Even after the funeral, the town couldn't agree on what really happened. In coffee shops, at church gatherings, and around dinner tables, theories spread like wildfire. Some people believed it was simply an accident. Maybe she was tired after a long shift. Maybe she took a wrong turn, missed the road, and drove straight into the quarry without realizing it. To them, it was a tragic but simple explanation. Others whispered about suicide. They argued that sometimes even the strongest people break under the weight of the badge. But those who knew her best rejected this instantly. She had plans, dreams, and a life she loved. She wasn't someone who would give up. The darker theories were harder to ignore. Some insisted she was forced off the road, maybe chased, maybe ambushed. They believed someone wanted her gone, a criminal she arrested, a jealous coworker, or even a stranger. To them, the quarry wasn't an accident. It was a grave. Each theory only added more fuel to the fire. Every new debate dragged her family back into the spotlight, reopening wounds that never healed. The truth was, no one really knew, and that was the hardest part. Decades have passed, but in that small town, her story never really faded. People still drive by the old quarry and feel a chill. Some slow down, staring at the dark water, almost expecting to see the outline of a car beneath the surface. Parents warned their kids to stay away from the place, calling it cursed. At school, her case is told like a ghost story. Teachers mention the young deputy marshal who vanished and was only found years later in the quarry. For many kids, it becomes the first real mystery they ever hear. They grow up with her name etched into local memory. Older residents remember the search parties, the vigils, and the heartbreak. They remember the fear that spread when one of their own, someone sworn to protect them, simply disappeared. For them, the case is not just a story, it's a scar on the town itself. Even now, on anniversaries, flowers appear near the edge of the quarry. No one knows who leaves them, but they always show up. It's a quiet reminder that she is not forgotten. The town has moved forward, but it has never truly let go. Even though the case is closed on paper, her story has never truly ended. For her family, every day is a reminder of the years stolen from them. Birthdays, holidays, and simple quiet dinners all carry an empty chair. They never stop feeling her absence. In the community, her name is spoken with both pride and sadness. She is remembered as a young deputy who stood for duty, courage, and sacrifice. Streets and buildings carry her name now, ensuring future generations know who she was. But with that honor comes a shadow, a reminder of how quickly life can be ripped away, and how justice doesn't always give answers. For law enforcement, her case remains a warning. New recruits are told about her during training, a story meant to remind them of the dangers that come with the badge. Her disappearance is studied as an example of how even one of their own can vanish without a trace. Her story also fuels determination. Many detectives who work the case say it changed them forever. It taught them persistence, compassion, and the cost of unanswered questions. Though the mystery may never be solved, her name still echoes.